An intense quarterback battle between a veteran and a rookie. A really solid defense, and also one of, if not the hardest schedule in the National Football League. A lot to talk about in New York Giants football. Welcome back to 32 on 32 here on Chase's Sports News, where we preview each NFL team season with a team reporter. And today we preview the New York Giants' upcoming season with a very special guest, one of their team hosts and reporters, Madelyn Burke. Madelyn, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Chase.
I'm so glad you're here. Obviously, it's incredible. You've done so much. I know you do stuff with CBS Sports HQ and all that, but today we're going to specifically focus on the New York Giants, and I know you're in that facility a lot. You're with the team. Overall, what stood out to you from Giants minicamp?
Honestly, I think the biggest difference this year is the energy, the mood. It's it's obviously this time of year, the optimism is there. Everyone is 0-0, and it doesn't matter what your record was last season. It's a fresh page, it's a clean slate. But I think with the new faces that they brought in and the leadership that Russell Wilson has added to this locker room, and the joy that Jameis Winston has brought, and the new pieces on defense, the veteran leadership that we've seen on, each level of the defense, plus the rookie addition of Abdul Carter, there's just so much excitement and so much personality as well with the new additions to this team. So it's gonna be a fun season.
And I think part of obviously having kind of a positive energy in the locker room has to do with the quarterback position. There was a lot of unknowns with Daniel Jones when he was the quarterback. And I think that now you kind of have hit the reset button on this franchise. You were in 2022, you're a divisional round team. Then you go 6-11 the next year. You lose Saquon Barkley, and you kind of say last year, all right, this is the prove it or lose it deal for Daniel Jones, or year for Daniel Jones in a sense. And he just didn't play well. Things didn't go well. You finished 3-14. Considering this was a playoff team 2 years ago, how did everything unravel to where they're at now?
Every year is a different year, right? And I think the momentum plays a big part in it. The injury, one of the biggest things that people don't notice, when you look at the Jets, for example, Aaron Rodgers goes down in the first week of that season a couple of years ago, and people point to that and say, okay, that's why the Jets aren't good, because the quarterback, a position everyone notices and sees in a very sexy position, is one that people pay attention. But the Giants, their struggles came pretty consistently when a key player went down each season, and that was Andrew Thomas, the left tackle. And losing your left tackle is a significant blow, and it really does affect everything, especially quarterback play. If you can't trust your blind side in the same way, and not to say, that the players behind him are not good, it's just there's a different level from starting left tackle to not. I mean, several years ago, going into training camp, Brian Daboll joked, he goes, hey, every position on this roster is open for competition except for left tackle. And he said it a little tongue in cheek, but he did mean it, because Andrew Thomas is that vital to this team. So when he went down with the list, Frank, last year, that was a bit of a blow to a team that, going into that week, the first several weeks of the season, they had a consistent starting five at the offensive line. And Chase, there's been so much volatility in the offensive line for this Giants team. So having that was a huge factor. And just there's so much injury that is one of those things that sometimes, you can do your best to avoid it. But sometimes when the injury bug bites you in the wrong way and there's not enough depth to overcome that, that's what really hurts. And one of the things, yes, the Giants have addressed a lot of starting positions, but they've also addressed a lot of depth in the draft and in free agency, which I think will help that if the injury bug happens again in in an unfortunate way, they'll be more prepared to handle it.
Obviously, injuries are so difficult. They sometimes say the healthiest team is the one that wins every year, and that kind of goes for Philadelphia last year. There were a ton of great teams. Kansas City didn't have a healthy offensive line. They didn't have a healthy receiving core. Philadelphia did, and they cruised their way to a Super Bowl. So sometimes it does really just come down to health. You mentioned Brian Daboll. I think that he seemed like he was very safe after an overachieving year in 2022. You win Coach of the Year. Now, after back-to-back finishes where you're toward the bottom of the NFL, do you believe the seat is warm for Daboll in New York? And I guess the same goes for Joe Chain as well as a general manager.
I think any organization wants to see success, right? Any organization wants to see a return on their investment and a positive trajectory. And that often reflects on the general manager and the head coach. You hire these guys to turn the ship a different direction and steer it that way through the rough waters. One thing that I do respect that John Mara addressed at the end of last season is, hey, I want to give these guys a little bit of time to do that, right? If you're changing a head coach every 2 years and you're moving the ship's direction this way and that way and this way, I mean, it takes a little time to change course and then to build onto that course. So you really need to not necessarily see a Super Bowl championship this year, as much as that would be incredible, but you want to see tangible progress towards it. And I think one of the things that we can see the tangible progress is what Joe Schoen has done and has kind of curated the cap issue situation that the Giants were in for the past several years. So as much as that to a casual fan on the outside who's just looking at wins and losses, they're saying, well, this team isn't getting better. But the math of it is, and the depth of the roster is, and these little things that accumulate to put you in a position to build towards the bigger things. Same with the coach. As much as the team has struggled, and you mentioned 3-14 last season, that's not really a record that anybody is going to be patting themselves on the back for, but the locker room was still together through a 3-14 season. A lot of teams that are struggling that much are going to start to point fingers and lose sight of the goal. And the fact that Brian Daboll, as a head coach, who 2 years removed from being coach of the year, is keeping a team together through that much adversity and that much loss, that's something that I think people should pay more attention to rather than, oh, the team's losing, should he get fired?
And I think you mentioned Joe Schoen maybe trying to prove that he should still be the general manager. I think he did that by having an incredible draft. They were one of my biggest winners from this past NFL draft. You mentioned Abdul Carter also trading up and getting Jackson Dart at 25th overall. And then you add Cam Scatterbo in the 4th round, which may have been my favorite pick throughout the whole draft just in terms of value and what he did at Arizona State. How have you assessed New York's draft looking back?
I think the draft, they've done fantastic with it, as you mentioned, especially like Scatterbo in the late rounds. That is a huge value pick. Darius Alexander in the 3rd round is going to be great for that defensive line. They really addressed a lot of needs on defense. They addressed a lot of needs in general and depth. I really, Scatterbo, of course, as a Sun Devil myself, someone who went to Arizona State, I was very excited for that pick. And I'm really looking forward to seeing him and Tyrone Tracy and how they manage that backfield together. The style of the way that the two of them run, going to be incredible for this offense. And then, of course, Jackson Dart, a quarterback who Brian Daboll looks at with hard eyes and really respects and admires, not only for his skill set, which he does have, an incredible arm and incredible talent, but also his mind and the way that he sees the game. And, Chase, this, like quarterback position from college to pros, it can be challenging to translate at times, but the biggest thing is how quickly your mind can register things. And one of the things that we see oftentimes with talented quarterbacks who struggle in the NFL is that they can't compute it all quick enough, or they don't trust themselves quick enough. And the fact that Jackson Dart has a sharp mind and the ability to pick up what Brian Daboll is putting down. And, I've talked to veteran players who have come in on this roster and said, hey, this is a hard offense. This is a talented, this is a layered offense with a lot of detail. It's a tough one to pick up. And the fact that Jackson Dart has impressed Brian Daboll with his football knowledge is a good sign. And he's not put in a position that he needs to go out there week one and be the guy. He's given a little bit of grace and a little bit of time to get his feet wet and get ready before they are going to lean on him. And he's behind a guy in Russell Wilson who's got a lot of great habits. He's a film junkie. His very first press conference with the Giants, he's referencing specific Theo Johnson routes, a rookie tight end last season. The fact that he is aware and studies it that deeply, that's a great influence on a rookie quarterback.
I think also having Jameis Winston there, just a lot of different talents, and again, a lot of different schemes they're learning and stuff. I think it will be great for Jackson Dart. But you mentioned, they completely overhauled the quarterback room. You bring in Wilson, you bring in Winston to pair with Dart. Now you have a really interesting quarterback battle. Where do you believe it's trending towards right now of who's going to start? Where do you think that will go by the end of training camp? Who will get that position?
I don't think it would be fair to characterize it as a battle. I think it's more, there is a competition, to be fair, as is any position, but I do think it's clear that Russell Wilson is the starter. I mean, just based on the contracts and the skill set, my perception and my understanding is Russell Wilson will be the starter week one, health permitting. Jameis Winston is the backup. So if something happens to Russ in the first few weeks of the season, if he has to come out of the game, Jameis is going to go in. He's QB2. And Jackson is also getting reps with the ones. He has been during OTAs and minicamp and will continue to. But with the goal of preparation, not game day preparedness to be the backup, and not at least at the beginning of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if towards the end of the season we see Jackson Dart starting. The Giants have a late bye week. There's only 4 games after the bye. So maybe depending on the record and the momentum of the season, maybe we see Jackson in on those final 4 games of the season. Or if the Giants are making a playoff push, maybe they just let Russ cook. I mean, Russell Wilson won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks at MetLife Stadium and has actually claimed the locker that he used for that Super Bowl as his locker this season. So he's a little bit, I don't know if it's superstitious is the word, but he's looking at this as this is an opportunity. He's not looking at this as, oh, this is a 3-win team. Let's try to turn things around. He's saying, no, this is a fresh season, a fresh squad. Let's go do our best to win a Super Bowl. So depending on the momentum of the season will depend on a lot of things. But Russell Wilson will be the starter week 1.
And you talk about kind of the positive attitude, and I think that is a lot of what Russell Wilson has provided. He brought that to Denver, brought that to Pittsburgh, had that in Seattle, and now is bringing it to New York as well. I think one of the other offseason moves that caught my eye for New York was the Javon Holland signing, and now I actually think the Giants have put together a really solid defense this coming season.
Absolutely. I mean, Javon Holland, incredible veteran in the defensive backfield. You look at the way that the defensive backs were kind of a lot of young guys the last couple of seasons. They need a bit of more of a veteran presence there. You've got Javon. You've also brought in Paulson Daboll. And having guys like that know how to elevate that level of the defense. You mentioned earlier, the Eagles winning the Super Bowl this year, a lot of the way they did it was defense. It was pressure on the quarterback. The defensive side of the ball was able to shut down Kansas City in their offense. And I think you look at the way the Giants address that. Number 3 overall pick, Abdul Carter, get that pass rush, put that pressure on the quarterback. 3rd round, Darius Alexander, continue to shore up that defensive line. The emphasis on defense and also the way that they've been approaching it during the spring and the summer as well. Shane Bowen implementing a turnover chest so that every time the defense gets a takeaway in practice, they celebrate it by putting the ball in a Pirates chest. And, a lot of that came from Shane Bowen's son's Little League team, which is the Pirates, and it gave him the idea. But it's working because he says, hey, what you focus on is what you grow. And the Giants really struggled in takeaways and turnover differential last season. This is something they want to improve on this season. We've seen it. Dane Belton's coming up with a takeaway almost in every practice, it seems. So that is an area in which I expect to see an improvement as well. But when you have an increase of talent at each level of the defense, it's going to be helpful.
I want to talk about the pass catching core a little bit. Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson were both among the league leaders in targets and receptions last year. And obviously Neighbors, made that happen for over 1,200 yards, had one of the best rookie seasons from a receiver. Overall, how do you see them, New York, utilizing their pass catching options when you also include Darius Slayton in the mix?
Yeah. One thing I want to point out about Malik Neighbors that, as incredible of a rookie year as he had, he also did that with 4 different quarterbacks throwing him the ball.
Right.
That is something that's hard to do, to develop chemistry consistently with that many passers, to be able to consistently be somebody to be relied upon in the offense. That is incredible for the Giants to have. Wan'Dale Robinson as well, a guy who I think quietly messed around and was among league leaders in receptions, deserves a little bit more credit too. Darius Slayton, such a reliable, consistent presence in the passing game. One player who I do expect to have an increase this season, though, Jalin Hyatt. I think he's known for the deep pass. Coming out of Tennessee, people were saying, well, can he run a route or is he just a go ball guy? And he is such a deep threat, but the Giants in recent years have been struggling to push the ball downfield. Now you see Russell Wilson and Jalin Hyatt working together in their own time. They've developed a real relationship and a chemistry already. They, I do think that it's a priority for Russ to get Jalin a bit more involved in the offense. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him, catching deep balls. That Russell Wilson moon ball is something. And it'll be good, but they've got a great receiving core. And then, the running backs can catch a ball or two. So it'll be fun to watch.
You just talked about the running backs. You talked about Scadaboo earlier. They have Devin Singletary in the mix. And then Tyrone Tracy, who had a solid rookie season considering the circumstances they were in, new quarterbacks, inconsistent offensive line play, injuries on the O-line as well. He had a really decent season, but I feel like we've seen some other rookies, the James Robinsons of the world, the Damian Pierces of the world, who had a tremendous rookie season and then just kind of fell off a cliff and never really was that same level player again. Do you believe Tracy will join that group, or do you see him excelling this coming year?
I think he'll excel this year. I mean, the sophomore slump is there for anyone, whether it's a running back, a receiver, a quarterback, anyone really. But I do think that the Giants have built this team again in adding more pieces to put him in a position to succeed, right? As drafting Cam Scattaboo, there's adding another element to that running back room instead of continuing to say, okay, Tyrone Tracy, run the rock. Every other team knows what's coming now that you've got a year on tape. So they've got to change up the look a little bit. Okay, we're bringing in Cam Scattaboo. How do these two play off each other? Do they do a two running back set? Do they have Tyrone Tracy running a wheel route? What are they going to do with him? How are they going to evolve him in year two as well? But he is such a talented guy. And like we said, too, last season, another 1,000-yard season, him and Malik Neighbors, 2,000-yard from scrimmage teammates. It was a success right there. And if that offensive success can pair with some defensive pressure and maybe translate to a handful more wins, then, then we're cooking with gas.
Absolutely. And I think this team could really possibly improve and get to that level. But I think the key problem, even with their improvements, is going to be the schedule. And we do this with every team. Let's take a quick look at the schedule. It's the hardest in the NFL. I think it's a 57% opponent win percentage from their opponents this coming season based on their record last year. And there are even other opponents in there, like a San Francisco or like a New England, that are going to be improved as well, that did not have great records last year, that don't really account for many win percentage totals in that kind of percentage as well. This is a really, really tough schedule. What stands out to you from the schedule?
Well, I think one thing to point out with that conversation in general is, like, we do this every year, right? The tough schedule, the win percentage based on last season. And remember 2022, you've got, Brian Daboll winning coach of the year, the team going to the playoffs. And that season, going into that season, the Giants had the toughest schedule of all teams. But then you play the games and you realize, okay, last season's Titans aren't this season's Titans. And last season, so as you mentioned, there's teams like the Patriots who have gotten notably better than they were last year, but there's going to be teams that we expect to be here that kind of come out here this season. So it's all a fresh slate. I do think, though, as more so than the opponents, one thing that stands out to me is the travel, right? They don't have their first home game until week 3, and that's a primetime game against Kansas City Chiefs. One thing we do know, Patrick Mahomes in years past has kind of, sometimes eased his way into a season. If you get Patrick Mahomes in week 3 versus week 13, that's a very different team you're playing against. So maybe the Giants could mess around and get a win in prime time. And then that momentum of an early season win in that regard could propel them. I really think, though, starting strong is going to be so imperative for this team. It's going to be hard to do opening at Washington, the Commanders, a tough team. Then week 2 at Dallas, always a tough place for the Giants to play. The fact that all of the NFC East teams are playing in week 1, though, is going to be helpful, because win or lose, if the Giants do drop week 1, they won't be last in the division. There will be another division team that's also 0-1. So there's a little bit of a level playing field too. But I think the biggest issue is just the heavy travel to start the season, primetime game at home. It really takes a while before they get into that Sunday 1 p.m. rhythm and at home. And so we'll see how that fares for a team with, again, there's a lot of consistency around the core pieces, but there's also a lot of significant changes. And how will those players like a Russell Wilson kind of carry this team through that, gauntlet of a schedule?
I mean, the NFC East is projected to be one of the tougher schedules. And you mentioned the beginning of the year. I mean, they really did the Giants dirty by having back-to-back divisional road games on the road to begin the season. And then welcome home, you get to play the 3-time reigning AFC champs. So you're right. That was a very brutal way to do it. And then also that week 14 bye, you mentioned how in those final 4 games, if they're really not in playoff contention, as I have here, that could be the time to switch it up and go to Jackson Dart and see maybe what he could provide, or if they would want to go for a franchise quarterback in the draft, or find it some other way. You mentioned at the beginning.
I will add, though, too, like a week 14 bye. Usually in the last 7-8 years, the Giants have had a week 10, week 11 bye that kind of splits the season down the middle. Week 14 bye, by the time you get to week 14, you are gassed. And granted, I would rather have a late bye than an early. I mean, there are teams out there with a bye in week 5. You're barely getting into the rhythm of the season. But week 14, you're going to be banged up. You're going to be, kind of limping through the finish line. So it's going to be tough getting through that first part of the season before the bye week. So we'll see how it all goes down.
We'll definitely see what happens here with New York's schedule. But you mentioned at the beginning of the episode that it's not just good for fans to look at the result and more look at the progress that's leading to what the end goal is supposed to be, which is a New York Giants Super Bowl. Given the fact that they do have a very difficult schedule and it's projected to still be difficult, even when looking at what these teams are projected to do this coming year. When you look at the schedule, but you also look at the improvements this team has made, how should fans judge how they do this season? Not based off record, but what should they be looking at to see if this team is improving and trending in the right direction?
Well, I think that there are market indicators for record that are not specifically final wins losses, but if you look at within the division, right, that's where you start. Can the Giants get some wins in the division? Right here, I'm looking at your projection. You've got a week 15 Washington win, a week 18 Dallas win. So it's 2 wins in the division, right? If they can split the division 500, that would be a huge win, right? If you've got 2 out of the 6 games right there, that could be great too. But you want to start getting wins in the division because that's really the bread and butter of how you build success. Home success is also something that I think that this team looks at as being important, right? Years past, the Giants have had a bit more success on the road than at home for some reason. But Giants fans are paying good money to come see their team at MetLife Stadium. You want to give them a solid product on the field as well. And I think the third indicator of things being in a positive direction is the play of the young talent. We mentioned how great this draft class looks and last year's draft class as well. Does that young talent continue to ascend? Do we see market improvements for those players? Do we see Jackson Dart and traits within Dart that say, okay, this is a guy who could be the face of this franchise for the next 10 years? If that is starting to come into shape, maybe they finish 5-12, maybe they finish, 8-7, who knows, or 8-9, who knows. But it really is going to be, okay, can you point to certain things and see, okay, that's getting better, that's getting better, that's getting better. We're closing the gap in these areas.
Progress, I think, is so important in the National Football League. And again, if Jackson Dart can be that franchise quarterback is kind of going to be the golden question of how New York will maybe approach the future this coming year. And I think it's very interesting how you brought up at the beginning of the episode. It's not just record, it's different situations that you have to look at as well to really judge if that team is trending in the right direction. And I think it will be very interesting to see if the Giants are this coming year. Overall, we're talking about this, that, what if, this, that. What do you think they are going to do? You're around the team, you're talking about this great energy, you're talking about the improvements, the leadership, how they're trending in the right direction. What do you see this team doing in 2025?
In terms of record, in terms of
record, or just kind of maybe how the feeling is this time next year about New York Giants football?
I think the biggest change in the way that we're looking at the Giants going into this season than the way that we were looking at them going into last season, for example, is they're starting to have a little bit more of an identity. The players they're bringing in, the Jackson Dart, the Cam Scattaboo, these kind of bro-y dudes who give each other a headbutt and are young and vibrant and have a little bit of personality. The defense and the ferocity of that defense that's coming into focus. An identity of a team is coming together. And that is something that I think by the end of this season, we may not know when the next Super Bowl the Giants are going to win is, but we will know who the Giants are and what type of team they are and stylistically, consistently who they intend to be. Because I think, when Brian Daboll came on as a head coach, he's got an offense that he likes to run. Mike Kafka has a style that he likes to coach. Defensively, since they've hired Shane Bowen, he's got a style that he likes to implement. But it takes time to curate a combination of the coaching vision and the talent on the field and make sure that not only is that overlapping, but also that the visions are adjusting based upon what kind of talent you have, right? If you want to throw the ball down the field, but you got a quarterback with a medium arm and you don't have receivers that can get there and you don't have pass protection, you can't curate an offense that way.
Right.
But it takes time to put the pieces in place to make your offense operate on the top level that you see fit. So now that they're kind of starting to put those pieces and they're coming together and they have this identity, now that that identity is curated, it's okay, we know what it looks like. Let's see what it actually looks like in execution.
Madelyn Burke, thank you so much for coming on the show today to preview the New York Giants season. There's so many discussions involving them, and if you're a New York Giants fan, I'm sure you've seen Madelyn's work. If not, the links to all of her work is in the description. We appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Chase. This was a blast.
I'm glad it was. We're going to wrap this one up here again. 32 on 32. The Giants are one of the first teams we've done. We have many more to go right here on Chase's Sports News. Do not go anywhere. Be sure to subscribe. Signing off, I am your host, Chase Coburn.